Next week, probably, we shall be starting with the soft OR approaches, which will take us to the end of the semester, right? So we discussed yesterday, we started discussing cost concepts yesterday, and we saw that several different classifications are possible for costs, and these concepts are probably familiar to all of you. But from our point of view, that is when we construct mathematical models or when we initiate any sort of OR study, especially hard OR study, some of the costs that are available are indeed important, and some others should not be taken into consideration. This is the central idea of this chapter, that some costs, which costs are relevant, which are irrelevant for decision making. On the technical side, again, the costs that we would like to use should be differentiated from the costs that are usually recorded in accounting books. And the type of cost that we use, the concept that we use is the opportunity cost concept, you remember. Now I shall give you an example of that, but before that, let's look at relevant and irrelevant costs very quickly again. A first classification of costs, if you remember, was explicit and implicit. Which costs are relevant for us? Well, explicit costs are often relevant, but in some cases, if they are sunk costs, that is, if we have already spent money on these costs which is not retrievable, then such explicit costs are irrelevant, and we gave an example. We said also yesterday that some of these sunk costs are not easily identifiable and can be hidden. For example, as depreciation entered for accounting purposes, this sort of cost is irrelevant. But here, an important point about depreciation is that you should always be careful to differentiate it from what we call the wear and tear cost. A wear and tear cost, that is, if you have an equipment of a piece of machinery, for example, that you use for production purposes, obviously, as you use it, the end of its economic life will approach. Okay? So after some date, the machine will be useless, will become useless. This is because the value of the machine will diminish in time, will decrease in time. Now, if you try to measure the exact decrease in the value of the machine, this is called the costs that we detract from the value of the machine. These are called wear and tear costs. Yani yıpranma ve eskime maliyeti. This is a real cost. In decision-making purposes, if your planning horizon is long range, in which you can make investment decisions and replace equipment, for example, wear and tear costs which belong to a period, for example, are real opportunity costs, and you should take them into consideration. You shouldn't confuse this sort of real wear and tear costs with depreciation. Depreciation is an accounting term, and it is arbitrarily decided. For example, you might decide to use straight line depreciation. If an equipment costs 100 liras and it is going to be used for 5 years, for example, you can assume that each year you incur a cost of 20 liras. 5 times 20 is equal to, this is straight line depreciation. Or you could, for example, use some other sort of depreciation and decide that during the first year you will incur 50 liras, and in the remaining years you will incur 30 liras, and then 20 liras, and it will be depreciated in 3 years. All these are legally possible. Huh? The law, the regulations of the government, of the state, allow you to depreciate. I'm not very clear about the Turkish regulations, but usually I assume that this is possible. So that sort of cost, depreciation, accountants' depreciation costs, is arbitrary. Usually it can be assigned arbitrarily. Whereas the wear and tear cost that we should be careful about is a real cost, and it should reflect the deterioration in the machine correctly, okay? So please remember that there is such a distinction. In some cases, of course, if your planning horizon is short, you might decide to ignore the wear and tear costs as you ignore the depreciation costs and assume it is irrelevant. That's something else, okay? I'm not saying that wear and tear costs are real and therefore they are always relevant. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that wear and tear costs are real and can be quite different from depreciation. Now, finally, all relevant costs, whether they are explicit or implicit, should be opportunity costs. I mean, they should reflect the foregone opportunity of resources used. In general, we have argued this several times, they are not the same as the accounting costs, which are historical costs. An example we mentioned before is also stated here. For example, the cost of warehousing space in the LOD example could be zero if there were no alternative use for the warehouse. If you cannot use the warehouse for any other purpose, then the cost associated with occupying a space in your warehouse by keeping inventories there would be zero. But if it were possible to rent out this space and obtain some income in other ways from this space, obviously the opportunity cost will not be zero. Okay. Again, finally, just a few more observations about relevant and irrelevant costs. Now, replacement costs represent opportunity costs that are often relevant, replacement costs, unlike historical purchase costs, which are irrelevant. What this means is that if you buy this item for some purpose and record the price you paid for this in your accounting books, okay? This is a historical purchase cost, which might be irrelevant because when you want to replace this, the price you have to pay may be different from the price that you paid historically, okay? So the replacement cost may not be exactly equal to the purchasing cost. Replacement costs are important for us, not purchasing costs, okay? Future costs and benefits are relevant opportunity costs that can be explicit, such as decommissioning cost or a salvage value. A decommissioning cost, you understand what a decommissioning cost? You know that there's a lot of debate about nuclear power stations because of the accident in Japan. And I don't know if you are following these. I have an interest in these, so I follow the arguments. And people say, for example, that a nuclear reactor is very expensive to construct, and that's true. It's very cheap to operate. But what they forget is that it has to be decommissioned at the end of its useful life. Decommissioning means deconstructing, okay? Yani söküm maliyeti. Decommissioning costs of a nuclear plant are very, very high. And decommissioning takes several years. You cannot just shut down the plant. So decommissioning costs, which will occur in the future, for example, are explicit costs. They will be out-of-pocket costs. And usually, they are relevant opportunity costs. Salvage value. Salvage value is a negative opportunity cost, obviously. When you decommission, maybe what you decommission is still worth some money. What we call it salvage value. Is salvage value. Intangible costs are relevant opportunity costs in the form of shortage costs, goodwill costs, etc., as we have debated. These are often important but difficult to determine. Extensive sensitivity analysis has to be carried out to estimate such intangible costs. So conclusions, just in 3 statements. We know, firstly, that accounting records are important. Historical accounting costs are not, we are not saying that they are not important. They are very, very important for other purposes. But not all of these are relevant to managerial decision making. When you are using cost information in order to decide something, make a policy change, then the costs that you should use must all reflect the opportunity cost, the opportunity that you lose by using those resources. Whether implicit or explicit or intangible, they must all be opportunity costs. Now, this example I like, well, it used to be an examination question when I first taught this systems thinking course some years ago. I put this down as an exam question. 130 students were taking the course. Only one student was able to solve this. And he was a student from the management department as a visitor. I don't know why that happened. But then I started using this for teaching purposes rather than examination purposes. I made this up using the LOD case. This is a made-up question, but it's nice. Let's read the question. A customer, I mean, if you understand this correctly, all right? Yeah, it's easy, it's not difficult, and you will have understood opportunity costing correctly. It's a useful example. You cannot find such examples in books, huh? So you have to thank me for this. Okay, a customer has offered to buy from LOD a special type of high technology lubricant, which is not among the lubricants that LOD normally produces. A customer asks for the manufacturing and delivery of a special type of lubricant. Therefore, the present offer represents a one-time project, and the customer has offered to pay 200,000 euros for the required amount. Okay? Yani 200.000 avroluk bir teklif gelmiş, proje teklifi. The lubricant requires mixing an oil A and the special agent B. The necessary amount of A is available in the stocks of LOD, but B must be obtained from an outside supplier, and an order has already been placed when the project was offered to LOD. So two raw materials are going to be used. The first raw material is already available, and for the second one, an order has been placed. The mixing process is quite complicated and requires the use of two kinds of capital equipment, C and D. Equipment C is already owned by LOD, but D must be leased from outside. You know what we mean by leasing, kiralama. This equipment is going to be leased if the project is taken, obviously. Mixing also requires that expert scientific help should be obtained from a nearby university. So LOD accountants put all these facts together and calculate the associated cost estimates for the project as follows. Remember that we needed two raw materials, A and B. A is already in stock, and the accounting cost in euros for this material is recorded by the accountants as 16,000 euros. B is on order, and when it is delivered, LOD will have to pay 18,000 euros for the second raw material. The labor cost is estimated as 70,000 euros. Most of this are the fees that are to be paid to the university for expert knowledge, so scientific labor, you can call it. But some of this must also reflect the labor cost of internal labor costs on the part of LOD personnel. The capital equipment, two types of machinery are used, C and D equipment are used. C is already owned by LOD, and the accountants estimated its depreciation, the cost to be charged to this project as 40,000 euros. D is going to be leased, and the leasing cost is 50,000, and general overhead for this project is again estimated as 30,000. Do you know how overhead is estimated in companies? Well, I myself don't know this exactly, but probably they do it like that. We all know what overhead is. Huh? These are fixed costs. Overhead for 1 year, for example, is computed like the costs of lighting, the cost of the cafeteria or whatever, I don't know. And then they arbitrarily, more or less arbitrarily, divide this total overhead cost among the products or the services they have produced during that year. So some part of this overhead is assigned to some products, some parts are assigned to a project, etc. Usually, from the point of view of decision making, we know that this sort of allocation is arbitrary. And we should be careful about that. But in other cases, it might be possible to really allocate some of the overhead to some activities, okay? So costing is a complicated business. And from my own experience, what I can tell you about this is that if you really are able to understand your costs in any institution as an industrial engineer, if you master, hakim olursanız to your costs, if you have complete understanding of the costs of an operation, you will have a very, very big advantage in your career. Because most companies in Turkey don't know what their costs are. Believe me, you can count very, very big and famous companies in this list. They do not know how to compute their costs. If you are able to compute the real costs, you will be a star in anywhere you work. This is really true. You will be able to make the correct decisions. You will be able to take the correct strategic decisions if you know the real costs. Anyway, I cannot exaggerate this too much. It is really very, very important. And it's not very easy. Here what we are doing is just we are learning the concepts. In a real world situation, of course, it's very complicated to identify the correct costs. But it is also extremely important. Okay, so this is the data provided by the accountants. Now, if you add up the costs on the right-hand side, if you add them together, the decision whether to take the project, accept the offer or reject the offer. Our problem is whether we should accept this offer of producing this, manufacturing this lubricant or not. How shall we decide that? Of course, on a cost and benefit basis. If the costs of the project are less than 200,000 euros, because that's the payment that has been offered for the project, then we should accept the project. If the costs add up to more than 200,000 euros, then the offer should be rejected. It's a very simple situation. Okay. Well, as you can see, I didn't write the sum of the accounting costs in this table, but if you look at this table here, the sum is 224,000 euros. Okay, accounting costs in the column headed as accounting costs. The costs are 224,000 euros, which is 24,000 euros more than the offer, 200,000 euros. So on the basis of this information, if you act on the basis of this information, you should reject the proposal because the total cost is greater than the total benefit, okay? But as a manager, you have further information available to you other than what your accountants tell you. Now, I try to make up this sort of information here. The LOD manager has the following additional information about the cost items. We know that if oil A is not used in this project, remember that oil A is available already in LOD. It can either be distilled at a cost of 5,000 euros and used in some other project to replace an input that would cost 18,000 euros. So there is the possibility of using this oil by first refining it, by spending 5,000 euros to refine it. Then after you refine it, you can use it in another project which is going on already in LOD, And if you use it there, it will replace an input that would cost 18,000 euros. So you will be saved from spending 18,000 euros if you use this oil after refining it in another project. Another possibility is not to refine it, but to sell it directly. If you reject the project, it will bring you 12,000 euros if you sell it, okay? We have this information. The other piece of information we have is that if agent B, which is not available, but we have placed an order for this, you remember, if agent B is not used in this project, it has to be sold for 12,000 euros. You can sell it for 12,000 euros. However, it is also possible to cancel the order before delivery. Since this is at the time on order and that has not been delivered yet, you can call the suppliers and say that I don't want this, but you have to pay a penalty of 4,000 euros for canceling the order according to your agreement with the suppliers, okay? Furthermore, much of the labor cost is to be paid to the university, as I said, the 70,000 euro, except for the wages of an LOD manager who must be transferred to this project. If this project is taken, then some of the 70,000 euro labor cost includes the wages of this manager. His wage cost is 20,000 euros. But if he is transferred to this project, someone else must be hired at a cost of 10,000 euros to replace him in his current duties. Okay? This is similar to the talented engineer example I mentioned yesterday. This is the same situation. The last piece of information is the following. Equipment C cost 240,000 when it was new. So the purchasing cost of equipment C was 240,000 euros. It is depreciated on a straight line basis, and the depreciation cost of 40,000 euros has been assigned to the project. The 40,000 euros associated with equipment C was a depreciation cost as assigned by the accountants. Now, if this project is not taken, we are assuming that equipment C will be sold at the second-hand price of 60,000 euros. This equipment is already going to be put on sale probably, but when this project offer arrives, it's possible to use the equipment for the project. If you don't take the project, we are going to get rid of this equipment in the second-hand market, and it will bring us 60,000 euros. If the project is taken, then we will use the equipment during the project, but we will sell it at the end of the project. And the estimate we can expect will be 40,000 after the completion of the project. So if we sell it now, if we reject the project, we can sell the equipment now and get 60,000 euros. If we accept the project and use the equipment, we can sell it afterwards for 40,000 euros. So all this information is also available. Now, can we recalculate the costs and see whether we should take the project or not, okay? Is it a nice example? It's very nice, isn't it? When I was first teaching the course, I thought, well, most of our students will be able to answer this question since they know what opportunity costs are. But anyway, so now here is the correct calculation at the last column, the opportunity cost column. How do we, the accountant's data is given in the middle column, as you can see, in the first column, and we can compare them. The material A, which was in stock, was assigned a cost of 16,000 euros by the accountants. Now, the real cost we should consider is 13,000. Why? Well, what you are going to, the way to find the data in the last column is by answering this question. You should just memorize this question all your life. throughout your career, you should ask this question. The question I reformulated somewhat. The present version of Lecture 7 PowerPoints are slightly different from yesterday's. I always make some modifications. So the question is, what is the highest net additional income that I can generate if I don't commit this item to this project? Okay, this is the relevant question. What is the highest net additional income that I can obtain if I do not use this resource in this project? The net additional income, what we mean by net additional income is also, I decided to define it here. It's firstly foregone income. Foregone income, the income that you cannot obtain because you are using the resource here. This is the income that could be obtained elsewhere, okay? Plus the expenses incurred because the resource is committed. When you use the resource, the net additional income will be computed as the sum of foregone income and any extra additional expenses that you have to incur because you are committing the resource to this project. So let's see now, let's go back to the cost of A. The cost of A, as you can see, I have included all the calculations here, is the maximum of 18,000 minus 5,000 and 12,000. Why? Well, we know, we are given the information that if I do not use A, then I can sell it for 12,000, that was given, or I can refine it and use it somewhere else. And when I use it somewhere else, I will make a saving of 18,000. All right? But first I have to spend 5,000 for refining. So 18,000 minus 5,000 is the net additional income I can generate if I do not use A for this project, but use it to replace some other input in some other project, okay? And 12,000. Which one is the opportunity cost? The highest. What is the highest net additional? So we choose the maximum of these. 18 minus 5,000 is 13,000, and 13,000 is greater than 12,000. So the opportunity cost of this material is 13,000 for us, not 16,000 at all. 16,000 is probably was the purchase cost of this material. Okay? Cost of B is given as 18,000 euros by the accountants. But the correct value, the opportunity cost of B is 14,000, and we calculate it again here. The information given to us about cost of B, B was not available at the moment, but an order has been placed. And the order, when deliveries are made, you will have to pay $18,000, 18,000 euros. Okay. But there are two options. If we do not commit B to this project, how much money can we make? We can either sell it, and it will bring us 12,000, as the information tells us, or we can instead cancel the order and not receive the product, stop the deliveries. So the savings then will be 18,000 minus 4,000, because the penalty for canceling the order, it will cost us 4,000. So the maximum of these must be the opportunity cost. 18 minus 4,000 is 14,000, and again it is greater than 12,000. So the opportunity cost of B for us is 14,000 euros. Labor is 70,000, estimated as 70,000. Now, of this 70,000, 20,000 belongs to the manager who has to be transferred from another project, and 50,000 goes to the university, okay? The sum is 70,000, but this sum is not the correct opportunity sum. The 50,000 that we have to the university is a real explicit cost. We have to pay it. So it is also the opportunity cost. But the remaining 20,000 is not. Because what happens is that when we transfer the manager from another project to this project, no money changes hands. He still receives his 20,000 salary, all right? But because we have moved him, we have to employ somebody else over there, and it will cost us 10,000. So the real labor cost is the 50,000 that the university takes, and the 10,000 that a new employee has to be paid. So it's 60,000. Not 70,000. Capital C owned was assigned with a depreciation cost of 40,000. Again, this is irrelevant for us. I mean, it's not correct for us. Cost of C is 60,000 minus 40,000, which is 20,000. Why? Because, again, ask yourself the question, if I don't use C, what income can I generate? Well, I know that if I don't use it, I will generate an income. I can sell it for 60,000, okay? But if I use it in the project, at the end of the year, I can sell it for 40,000. The difference is the opportunity cost. Do you understand this? This might be a little bit tricky because you can say that, well, if I don't use this equipment, I can sell it on the second-hand market, and the price I will get is 60,000. So its cost must be 60,000, the opportunity cost. It is not 60,000. Because even if you use it in the project, at the end of the project, you are going to sell it anyway, and it will bring you 40,000. So the real income that you can generate is only 20,000 if you do not use it in the project. All right? This is an example I am proud of. Huh? It's a very so as you add up the sum, it comes to 157,000 euros, and it will bring you a profit. I mean, you should take the project. It will bring you a profit of 43,000 euros. If you listen to your accountants, if you made the stupid mistake of using the accounting data, you would have lost this opportunity. You would be, how much of a loss would you have made? You would have made a loss of, opportunity loss of 43,000 euros.
Why is the general overhead zero?
General overhead, I mean, if you do not take this project, the general overhead will not reduce, will not be reduced.
Because of this project, maybe it will be...
No, I told you that, I told you in the beginning that overhead is normally something not associated with what you produce or what you do. It is for keeping the business going, huh? And arbitrarily it is assigned to projects and products. If it is really the overhead will increase because you have taken on this project, of course, then you would be right. But I didn't write all the details like that. Okay, when we mention overhead, usually it means that it is something independent of what we do or we do not do. In that case, it is irrelevant for decision making. But of course, if you are deciding something which takes place, activities which takes place in a long period of time, during which you can make investments, reductions in your capital equipment, et cetera, then of course overhead will change, and then it will become relevant for long-term investment situations. But in this sort of situations, short-term problems, overheads are irrelevant. Therefore, the project would be rejected on the basis of accounting costs, whereas it should have been accepted as shown by the opportunity cost analysis. Okay, so this is such an example. Now, finally, in this chapter, I'm not going to explain all the details of the case, but there is a case in chapter 9 of the textbook. This lecture 7 belongs to chapter 9 in the textbook. A very useful case example. This is why we like the textbook very much. The textbook is unique in providing real-world examples for OR students. Champignon galore. Champignon means mushroom in French. So there's a company called Champignon galore where they grow mushrooms, French mushroom growers. So I suspect that this is a real case, but maybe the names have been changed because it's a very realistic case. Now, mushroom growing is a three-stage process. So we learn about mushroom growing first. I don't need to really explain anything about this case, and I just can ask you to read it properly because, as I said, I expect you to be familiar with these cases since they may become sources for exam questions. You should be familiar with the cases. But anyway, let's spend a little time on this. Have you seen any mushroom growing facility? Did anybody see any? Well, there is one in Köyüşleri. If you go from Middle East Technical University towards Eskişehir, on the left there is Köyüşleri Bakanlığı. If you go in there, there is an institute where there are researchers working on agriculture. And they also grow mushrooms there, and I learned about this some years ago, and I went there, and they gave me two sacks of compost. There's no exact equivalent for compost. Compost is something where you grow plants or vegetables. It's not exactly fertilizer. It's not exactly soil, but a mixture of soil and fertilizers and other nutrients is a compost. And I got these two baskets of compost. They sprinkled some, what do you call it? Mycelium is the scientific name. Spores, okay? And they told me, take this, put them in a dark place, put water on them every day, cover them with a newspaper, and keep it wet for 45 days. At the end of 45 days, remove the newspapers and mushrooms will grow. And I took them, we have a basement which is dark, I put them there. 45 days I waited. At the end of the 45 days, really huge mushrooms. And of course I collected them, and they were very delicious, huh? Very big and juicy. And we ate them, and after a few days, a second crop appeared, and we also ate them. After a few days, a third one. But the amount of mushrooms decreased. Huh? Now, each collection of mushrooms is called a flush. At the first flush, I obtained so much mushroom that we called our friends and ate them together. In the second flush, again, it was very nice. But after third or fourth flush, nothing remained. And then you have to renew the compost. Huh? This is the way. So the compost is put in trays in an industrial process, of course. It takes 26 to 28 days. I remember as 45 days. Maybe my compost was different. And then you harvest the mushrooms in flushes. That is, you collect the first appearing mushrooms. That's called the first flush. Then after a few days, 6 to 8 day intervals. After 6 days, you collect the second flush, etc. And normally, industrially, I mean in this company, the number of flushes should be less than 5. because if you wait for the 6th flush, the yield will be very poor. I mean, you will be able to get only very little mushroom, and it's not economical. So, so this is the way. The trays are kept in sheds, and you can see these sheds in the köy işleri. There is also a sign saying that there is the National Botanical Gardens. Türkiye Milli Botanik Bahçeleri diye de şey yazıyor. You should visit it. I want to visit this if it's a real botanical garden. So it's a nice place. You can see all of these things there if you visit. I don't know how, if they let people in. When I went there, I said, I'm coming from the university, so they said, okay. Okay. So there are 66 sheds. In there they had, I think, 2 sheds. 400 trays can be put. These sheds are small buildings which are completely dark. There are no windows because mushroom grows in the dark, okay? So of these 66 sheds, 65 of them are always in operation. One is not used because you have to clean them between cycles, and it takes 2 days to clean. So this sort of data is given. Now, the problem here is that it's a successful company. It is growing a lot of mushrooms and exporting them to England, I think, from France, and also to the French market. And they would like to increase their production. And there are some alternatives under consideration. The first alternative is adopting 2-layer sheds at the current site. You know, in one shed, it's possible to stock how many? 66? No, 400 trays. But if you construct another layer, and the one in köy işleri was like that, I think, in 2 layers, then you can stock another maybe 44 trays in the second layer. So that's one option. Another option is to acquire a second site for new sheds, to lease some more land on which you can construct new sheds. But somebody there says that, well, maybe we can change the number of flushes. Instead of collecting 5 flushes, this is what they currently do. By increasing or decreasing the number of flushes, maybe it is possible to obtain a greater total product at the end without adding any new sheds or anything like that. So it's a realistic sort of situation. This sort of problem always occurs. There are alternative courses of action. And, and in this example, we're going to, an OR study is initiated. And it has been decided that only the third alternative will be considered at the moment. The other alternatives, why do you think only the third alternative is considered and not the first 2? What might be the reason? Hmm? Yeah, you don't have to spend any money. For the first 2 options, you have to make capital investments. The third option is doesn't require probably any capital investment. So it's a good idea always to evaluate an alternative which doesn't require you know, irreversible decisions like making capital investments, etc. And instead of and looking at these results, it might be possible to ignore the other options for the moment instead of evaluating each of the 3 options and comparing the results and making a decision. Okay, so this sort of flexibility is very, very important. So when the third option is decided, when they decided to take up the third option, they, of course, also make additional assumptions, which are the boundary judgments. As follows: the production process is assumed to be remaining unchanged. That is, the 66 sheds and the 400 trays per shed will be the same. Additional output will be, we shall be able to sell the additional output at current prices. This is a powerful, strong assumption. which may not be realistic, but we make this assumption. Additional inputs we assume can be obtained at the current prices. I mean, if you are going to increase production, maybe you will have to obtain additional inputs, which might be more expensive than your usual inputs. But again, we make this assumption that this will be possible. And since we are going to, our decision variable is going to be the number of flushes. We shall change the number of flushes and to see whether any additional production will be possible through this. And again, another assumption is that this number can be anything between 1 and 5. We do not consider 6, 7, etc. This is, again, another boundary judgment that we make. Okay? Okay, let's take a break.